Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is exhibit. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you are likely to hear exhibit used is to mean to publicly display something in an art gallery, a museum, or at a trade show. So, anytime something is being shown or displayed to the public, we can use this verb to describe that action. A second way you'll hear exhibit used is to mean to show as a sign or symptom. Okay, so sometimes in connection to our health, in connection to people or patients in a hospital, we might hear medical professionals say that a certain patient is exhibiting certain symptoms or signs of an illness or condition. A third way you'll hear exhibit used is to mean to intentionally display a quality or a type of behavior. So I can remember back to my days in elementary school when I had a very strict teacher in mind for one of the years saying students were exhibiting bad behavior. They were intentionally behaving badly. You should know that exhibit is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is add ing to the end to form exhibiting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb exhibit ends with an unvoiced T sound. And when we add the ed ending, we're going to add an extra syllable to this verb. We're going to make an id sound as we say this past tense form. It should sound like this: exhibited, exhibited. Okay, I hope you can hear that extra syllable as I say it. Now, you should be aware there aren't any phrasal verbs that we need to study today, no additional meanings, so we can focus on practicing a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the past progressive and the present perfect progressive. Let's start with the past progressive. Many teachers and books will refer to this as the past continuous, and I like to tell all of my students these two things mean the same thing. So past progressive, past continuous, either one works. But we use the past progressive to talk about an action that was ongoing during some period in the past. It's also common to hear the past progressive used when we want to describe an action that was ongoing or continuing, right? And then it gets interrupted by some other action in the past tense. So that first ongoing action, that's in the past progressive, and then the interrupting action is generally in the simple past tense. Okay? Now, the reason I like calling this the past progressive is I see two P's. That's going to help me remember I need two parts to make my verb. So I'm going to use the past form of be. So that's was or were, depending on my subject. And then I use that ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an affirmative example. The suspect was exhibiting strange behavior on the night of the crime. So maybe this is a witness explaining that there was something odd, something maybe a little different about this particular person who now others might believe committed a crime. Let's talk about making negative past progressive sentences. To do this, we start with our subject, and then again we use was or were, depending on what that subject is, followed by not, and then the ing form of the verb. It's also really common to hear the contractions wasn't or weren't used. Here's another example. The student artists weren't exhibiting their works over the semester break. Okay? So another definition here, another way to use this particular verb, but we're talking about an ongoing period of time in the past. So here, it's kind of the absence of an action occurring. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, I start with was or were, whichever form matches my subject, that subject comes next, then the ing form the verb. Here's another example. Was the patient exhibiting signs of a stroke? So again, we're looking for indications in the way they're acting, maybe how their speech is, their ability to move or feel a certain side of their body. Those might be some signs that a person has undergone or had a stroke. Now let's talk about the present perfect progressive. Again, some books and some teachers call this the present perfect continuous. That is perfectly okay. But I like using present perfect progressive because the 3 P's are going to help me remember I need 3 parts to make this verb. I've been talking a lot about the present perfect progressive in the last couple weeks in several of my classes. We've been talking about how we're using this verb tense quite often to really stress that some action started in the past and is continuing now into the present. And we're maybe choosing this particular verb tense to note that continuation, that the action is still ongoing. We've also discussed how it's really common to hear this verb tense used when we're talking about how long, the duration of a particular activity. Okay. So I said earlier, present perfect progressive is going to have 3 parts, and that is very true. In the affirmative, in our positive sentences, we start with a subject, then based on what that subject is, we'll use either have or has. That's the first part. Then we use the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then we use the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The local economy has been exhibiting strong, continuous growth throughout the last year. Okay. I borrowed a sentence from a recent article, again, kind of focusing on what signs or indications are there that the economy in this particular area, so we might be talking about a city or a small region, exhibiting or showing signs of growth. Now let's look at making negative present perfect progressive sentences. To do this, again, I start with my subject, then I use either have or has, then I use not, then the participle been, and then the ing form of the verb. You might hear some speakers use contractions like hasn't or haven't, and then been, and then the ing form. That's great, means the same thing. Let's take a look at another example. They haven't been exhibiting COVID symptoms. You know, that's something maybe you've heard, or maybe you've seen a question in this form as you've gone to visit the doctor over the last few years. Many times there's still a lot of precautions taken so that we're not spreading this disease as rapidly as it had been at the start of the pandemic. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question. To do this, I start with have or has, then I'm going to have my subject, then the participle been, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Has the museum been exhibiting the recently restored paintings? Again, showing, displaying to the public. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb exhibit. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. The noun exhibit, you'll notice, has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. It can also have several different meanings. One would be to refer to either an object or a collection of objects, so think of like a related group of objects that are on display at a gallery, maybe in a museum, or even at a trade show. An example of this. What is the newest exhibit at the Science Center? So many times hear this noun used in connection to galleries, museums, etc. A second way to use the noun exhibit is to refer to some sort of document, or maybe another object that is used as evidence in a trial or some type of court proceeding. An example of this: the prosecution has introduced over 100 exhibits during the trial. So again, this has a very specific meaning. If you're not working in a legal field, you might not see this used as often, but in case you are, then it is something you might encounter. The next word we're going to look at is the noun exhibition. Exhibition. This can also be used a number of different ways. One way you'll hear exhibition used is to refer to some public display. Usually it's a collection of works or interesting objects, something kind of connected and related. So again, this could be at art galleries, could be at museums, could be at trade shows. All of those could apply. So an example of that might be, this summer we visited the Field Museum's exhibition, Native Truths. Okay. So this was a collection of many, many different things related to indigenous people in the Midwest. Kind of focused, the Field Museum is in Chicago, Illinois. My family and I spent some time there reading, looking at objects, listening to stories. All of these things together made this public display or exhibition. A second way we can use the noun exhibition is connected to sports. So many times this is going to be some type of game or competition, but it doesn't really count, is how many people would say it. So it's not going to affect our standings, like how well the team is doing. Are they going to make it to the playoffs? Some people might think of this a bit like a practice type of experience. So an example of this might be, the team will play 2 exhibition games abroad. Many professional teams in the United States have started doing this, where before their official season begins, they might travel overseas, have some games against other opponents, but again, those games aren't really counting towards how the season is going. The last word we're going to look at today is the noun exhibitor. Exhibitor. This is going to be a person, or could be a group of people who display some type of works or objects, anything that might be of interest. And generally it's being done at some sort of exhibition. So in a gallery, in a museum, at a trade show. An example of this: there will be over 100 exhibitors at this weekend's health fair. Okay. So this would be an example of like a trade show, so kind of connected to a particular field. At a health fair, you might run into different medical providers, clinics, people selling exercise services, equipment, things like that, health food, right? All of these things sort of connected to living a healthier life. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.